So we had our first talk from Missouri in the middle of United States. Second talk was from East Coast, from Pennsylvania. Now we move to West Coast. So it's my pleasure to invite Veronika Sunko from University of California, Berkeley, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I just want to check, can everybody hear me? Is this and see the slides? Is this working?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yes. So thank you for organizing this workshop. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for accommodating even the time zones, 10 time zones away. Yeah, thank you for staying for the last talk of the workshop. We're going to switch now gears and go a little bit in the experimental world. And apologies for changing my title in the last moment, but I wanted to tell you about some recent work which I think would be of interest to this community. And so in general, the theme of the talk today is going to be how can we detect antiferromagnetism and also ultramagnetism using magneto-optical probes. So before we get into that, I wanted to start on a bit of an advertisement note. So you can see I have two affiliations here. One is UC Berkeley, which is where I currently am, but only for about 6 weeks. And at the start of September, I'm moving to the Institute of Science and Technology, Austria, where am my slides switching? Okay. Yeah, where I will start my own group. It's just outside of Vienna here, and my lab is currently being built in this building here. And so if you're interested in collaborating in any kind of capacity, please reach out. We'll be working on the kind of things that I'll tell you about today, and many more. And in particular, I want to advertise that we have a graduate school program. So if you know somebody who might be interested, please let them know. But today I'm going to talk about the work I did during my postdoctoral time at UC Berkeley in the group of Joe Ornstein. And I want to start by thanking him and the members of his group with whom I collaborated, you, Elizabeth, and Alex, for graduate students, as well as our many collaborators. So the samples I'll tell you about today, we got from groups of James and Elitis, one class of samples, others from J.Q. Yan from Oak Ridge and Dmitry Ovchinnikov from Kansas University. And also, I collaborated very closely with theorists, in particular with Thais, who was at the time a postdoc working with Joel. She's now a professor in Brazil, as well as Rafael, who was already mentioned in the last talk. And I also collaborated on a project with Sophie Weber, who is now in Sweden. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how can we use light to detect breaking of time reversal symmetry. So let's start by talking about what we mean by time reversal, which is very familiar to this audience as well, but I think it's maybe good to remind ourselves. What we really mean always is motion reversal. And so because the magnetization is a little bit like a loop of current, that means that time reversal will reverse a sense of magnetization. And of course, everything that then has a magnetization, like a ferromagnet, breaks time reversal symmetry. And things, as was discussed extensively in this workshop, get more complicated in systems with no net magnetization, such as antiferromagnets. And so here, if we have a simple case of antiferromagnet, this chain of alternating spins, if we apply a time reversal symmetry operation, we will change the direction of each individual spin. So strictly speaking, time reversal is broken. But if we do something as gentle as just moving all of the spins by one lattice site or half a magnetic unit cell, we retrieve the same configuration. And so here, all the time reversal is broken. The product of time reversal and translational symmetry is not. And this is important, and it's important for classifying antiferromagnets, as was already discussed as well. And so here there is this famous picture from this paper discussing ultramagnets, where we also see an antiferromagnet which has this product symmetry of time reversal and translation. And the way we can see that is that there are these blobs which signify magnetization density, and the blue and red ones have opposite sense of spin. But if we just translate the blue one onto the red one, we get the same state back. So this is an example of a time reversal times translation symmetric antiferromagnet, which ensures spin degeneracy in momentum space. Once this is not possible, for example, because of these magnetization blobs have different shapes, then this symmetry is broken, and this allows for spin splitting and ultramagnetism to happen. And so the point I want to make here in the context of my talk is that it really, really matters if we want to detect something, whether it breaks or preserves this product symmetry. And if it breaks it, we say that bulk effects that require time reversal symmetry breaking are allowed, such as the magnetoelectric effect, piezomagnetic effect, and the anomalous Hall effect. If it's symmetric under this product symmetry, I would say that bulk effects that require time reversal breaking are not allowed because in bulk we're not sensitive to these translations. But this is actually a pretty subtle point, and we have to ask the question of what do we really mean by bulk? And in the context of this talk, what we have to ask is whether optics is a bulk probe. Okay, so can we detect antiferromagnetism in systems that have this symmetry optically? Okay, and so today I'm going to show you some data on two compounds. One of them breaks the symmetry and the other one preserves it. So the first one is europium indium arsenide, and here we will be using magneto-optical techniques to ask the question, what is the magnetic structure? And I'm going to show you an example of a material that preserves this symmetry, manganese bismuth telluride. And here we are going to look into the optical symmetry of optical signatures of time reversal symmetry breaking, even in presence of this product symmetry. And as you can tell from the length of the talk and the fact that I want to talk about two compounds, I will really not go into any level of detail into the physics of these two materials, and I'll just use them kind of as case studies to show you what we can do with magneto-optics. So in the rest of the talk, I'm first going to introduce those optical probes of symmetry. I'm going to go in a little bit of detail to give you a context for how we can use them in other materials as well. And then I'm going to talk about these two examples. I'm going to talk about how we use the tool we call linear magneto-birefringence, which we've been developing in europium indium arsenide, and then how we use reflection circular dichroism, which is more standard magneto-optical probe in manganese bismuth telluride. Okay, so let's start talking about how we probe symmetries using optics, using light. And before we get into time reversal symmetry, we'll start with rotational symmetry, which is a little bit simpler. So how do we detect rotational symmetry? In all of our experiments, the geometry is something like this. So we will have a laser beam coming onto the sample and being focused on a few micron spot and bouncing off that sample and then being detected. And the main quantity which we control and monitor is the light polarization, in particular the angle of polarization of linearly polarized light. And so let's see now what happens if you have this linearly polarized light coming onto a material with C4 symmetry. One thing I want to note is that I will illustrate these symmetries with positions of atoms as seen here, but really the power of optical probes is that they are sensitive to the lattice symmetries, electronic degrees of freedom, magnetic degrees of freedom, and so we can pick up on any kind of origin of symmetry break. Okay, so our linearly polarized light, horizontally polarized light, comes onto the sample and some of the light bounces back. And then we repeat this experiment with vertically polarized light, and the same amount of light bounces back. And this equivalence is guaranteed by fourfold rotational symmetry because here the horizontal and vertical directions are equivalent. So then we repeat this experiment, but now in a material that has only C2 symmetry. And so now the horizontal and vertical directions are not equivalent anymore. And we could have, for example, more light reflected for vertical polarization. And so now something interesting happens when we shine light at some arbitrary direction between horizontal and vertical, and that is that the reflected light rotates away from the direction of incident polarization towards the direction of high reflectivity. And so this polarization rotation is the quantity that we measure in our experiments. And our result looks something like this. This is a simulation. There are these polar patterns where the angle on the polar pattern indicates the incident light polarization, and the amplitude indicates the amount of polarization rotation, which may be positive or negative. And there are some directions for which there is no polarization rotation, and those we refer to as the principal optical axis. Here they're horizontal and vertical. And so this effect I'll call birefringence, which is a little bit of a jargon, but I have to use this word a lot, so please pay attention to it. Okay, and I've demonstrated how birefringence is allowed in presence of C2 symmetry, but it's forbidden by C4 symmetry, and we can also show it's forbidden by C3 or C6 symmetry as well. And so it's quite a powerful tool because it tells us, if we see this experimentally, that all of these higher rotational symmetries have to be gone, and we are left with at most C2 symmetry. Okay, so now onto the real or onto the real topic here, which is how we detect time reversal symmetry breaking. So the really nice thing with optics is that we can do it using literally the same setup that we use for rotational symmetry breaking. Again, we are measuring the polarization rotation as a function of incident polarization. But if we now see a polarization rotation that's independent of the incident polarization angle, that's a signature of the so-called magneto-optical Kerr effect, and it's evidence of the breaking of time reversal symmetry. So because of those two things can be measured in the same setup, they can, of course, also happen at the same time. We can detect both simultaneously, and that's great because they just add coherently. So if both birefringence and MOC are present, we would just measure a coherent sum of the two, and we can easily disentangle them. So we can simultaneously measure breaking of these different symmetries in the same sample on the same spot. Okay. Now, to go on, I have to go a little bit beyond showing you these cartoons for MOC, and I have to show you a little bit of a mathematical description to make sense of some of the things I will say later. So in order to describe reflection properties of any material, we use reflection matrices, which really tell us how the light polarization changes upon reflection. And so if we want to describe reflection on the basis of linear polarization, and we want to describe something that exhibits the magneto-optical Kerr effect, we will have these off-diagonal antisymmetric terms. So this is reminiscent of the Hall effect in transport, right? And this is no accident. It comes from the same kind of underlying symmetry. So off-diagonal antisymmetric terms in reflection mean time reversal is broken. But once we're not in DC transport, like with anomalous Hall effect, but at optical frequencies, we can also describe the system in the basis of circular polarization. And those two descriptions are always equivalent. One just might be a little more convenient than the other. And so if we turn this description in the linear basis into the circular basis, we end up with a diagonal matrix now, but with different entries on the two diagonal spots here. Okay, and so then what is really the Kerr effect or the complex Kerr angle, which is the quantity that's measured? It's the ratio of this delta R, of this difference between reflectivity for left and right circularly polarized light, divided by their average by R naught. And this quantity is complex in general. It has its real part, which gets referred to as the Kerr rotation. That's what I was talking about here. It has its imaginary part, which gets called a reflection circular dichroism usually. So, okay, this was a little bit of detail, but really the main things I'd like you to take away from this slide is that Kerr effect and reflection circular dichroism have the same symmetry. So from the perspective of this talk, they're equivalent. You don't need to worry about which one I mention. And also that they come about because of the difference in reflectivity for left and right circularly polarized light. The important point is that both of these have the same symmetry as an out-of-plane magnetization. So a system that has an out-of-plane magnetization allows both MOC and RCD. However, an out-of-plane magnetization is not necessary to see these effects. Another important point is that time reversal symmetry is necessary to see these things. But it's not sufficient. So there are systems that break time reversal symmetry, but do not exhibit MOC or Kerr effect or anomalous Hall effect. And so this really motivates the development of additional complementary probes of time reversal symmetry breaking. And so one of those that I want to mention today is linear magneto-birefringence. So this experiment is based on a measurement of birefringence, which I just introduced. So this measurement of rotational symmetry breaking, which gives these flower-like patterns. But what we are now going to do is look at how this pattern changes if the sample is placed in a magnetic field. And in particular, we will look at the differences in pattern for a magnetic field pointing up or pointing down. And so now this should sound a little bit weird because I've just told you these patterns happen because of the breaking of rotational symmetry in a plane. And now I'm saying that they will change in some way if I apply a perpendicular magnetic field. But in fact, the fact is this can happen. Principal optical axis can rotate in the opposite direction for the opposite sense of magnetic field. But this can happen only if the system breaks time reversal symmetry even before we've applied an external magnetic field. And one way to think about it is that for this to happen, something has to couple linearly to a magnetic field, so it has to already break time reversal symmetry. And actually, this relates to something that was discussed in the previous talk, which is the piezomagnetic effect. So this optical effect, linear magneto-birefringence, has the same symmetry as the piezomagnetic effect, and that makes it a really good probe of ultramagnetism. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the details of experimental tricks for how we detect this magnetic field dependent changes, but we can do that with great sensitivity. And I'm just going to plot here this field linear component of birefringence in blue, and we are ready now to, I think, look at some experimental results. The main takeaway from this slide is linear magneto-birefringence is a change of birefringence that's a linear function of magnetic field, and it's evidence of time reversal symmetry breaking and has the same symmetry as the piezomagnetic effect. Okay, and we actually saw that, and we saw it in europium indium arsenide, which is the first compound I'll tell you about today. Again, we won't go into any details of its physics. The main thing you need to keep in mind is that magnetism comes from these europium atoms, europium planes. Each plane is ferromagnetic, so we are only thinking of this compound as a one-dimensional chain of magnetism along Z, and spins are actually in plane, in europium planes. Okay, so we take this compound and we do our optical measurements. So the first thing we do is a polarization rotation measurement in zero applied field. And we see this flower-like pattern. So this looks like the birefringence patterns I've shown you in the simulations I've shown you earlier. But I've also mentioned how from this experiment we can extract both the magneto-optical Kerr effect and birefringence. So we do that as a function of temperature, and we see a very well-defined transition where birefringence onsets. So this indicates breaking of rotational symmetry, but we see no magneto-optical Kerr effect beyond the noise level or our measurement sensitivity level. So based on this, we can conclude that there is only one transition, and we don't see any evidence of time reversal symmetry breaking, really. Okay, but then we do the linear magneto-birefringence effect, and we also see a signal. So this now means time reversal symmetry is definitely broken. And to convince you that this is evidence of time reversal symmetry breaking, we can cool down the sample in positive or negative magnetic field, and we see different sign of this signal. So it really is trainable by field. And if we now look at the temperature dependence of the linear magneto-birefringence, we again see a very sharp onset of the signal at a slightly lower temperature. So now we see that we have actually two phase transitions detected in the same setup on the same spot on the sample, and they correspond to different symmetries being broken. And I'm not going to go into what do these transitions really tell us about this sample, but they tell us a lot. And especially when combined with previously available scattering information, they allowed us to uniquely identify pretty unusual structures associated with both of those phases. Okay, so this was how we can use magneto-optics to understand a magnetic structure that was otherwise not easy to identify. And in the remainder of the talk, I'm going to talk about this different compound, manganese bismuth, and here we will look at the possibility to see magneto-optical signatures of time reversal symmetry breaking, even in the presence of this product symmetry of time reversal and translation. So manganese bismuth, again, I'm not getting into any details of the physics. The magnetism is now on the manganese sites. Manganese planes are again ferromagnetically aligned, so we are again thinking only about the relative orientation of spins in neighboring planes, but now spins are out of the plane. One thing I do want to mention is that this compound is quite well known as a van der Waals ferromagnet that can be exfoliated, and a lot of work has been done studying the difference of magnetism and electronic responses in even and odd layer samples. That's not what I'm doing here. You can read about those in many papers here. Everything I'm doing, we are looking at optically thick samples, which means they're thick compared to the optical penetration depth. Okay, so as I said, spins are out of plane, and they are antiferromagnetic. So this is our zero field magnetic structure. And so now we are going to look at first the magnetization, bulk magnetization curve as a function of magnetic field. And so this is shown here. You see, at zero field, there is no magnetization corresponding to the antiferromagnetic structure. And then as a function of field, there are two features. There is this step here, and then there is a kink here at about 7 Tesla. So this kink corresponds to saturation, and we won't spend a lot of time on it, but the step here is really important for us. And so this step corresponds to the spin-flop transition, which is a transition where it becomes energetically really unfavorable for spins to point in the direction that's opposite to the magnetic field. So what happens is they all flop, and now their Z component is always aligned to the field, but the antiferromagnetic component still survives in plane, like so. And the important thing here that you see directly in the magnetization measurement is that there is a sudden jump in the net magnetization along the Z direction. Okay, so now we are going to compare this magnetization measurement to the measurement of reflection circular dichroism. And as a reminder, reflection circular dichroism has the same symmetry as MZ, so our zero order naive expectation, or not naive, like that is what we should expect, is that RCD will follow the magnetization curve identically. But what happens when we look at this RCD curve, shown here for 2 directions of sweeping the field, is that this kink and this jump are reproduced almost exactly. So we are sensitive to the bulk, but there is an additional feature that's seen in RCD, but it's not seen in the bulk magnetization around zero field. So we detect a reflection circular dichroism in zero field when we know for a fact there is no bulk magnetization. And so the question we want to address is, what is the origin of this signal? So the first experimental thing we are going to do is try to acquire more information. And the way to do that is to repeat this measurement as a function of wavelength or as a function of photon energy. And so we do that in many, many wavelengths. And so what I'm showing you here is the magnitude of this spin flop jump as a function of wavelength. And this is useful because we know microscopically that the origin of this signal is the increase of magnetization. And then I'm going to also show you the magnitude of this signal at zero field as a function of wavelength. And so what you can see without any further analysis is that these two look very different, right? So that indicates somehow that there is a different microscopic origin from the purple and the red curve. And the question we ask, of course, is, can we understand these two spectra? Can we use the spectrum to understand where RCD at zero field is coming from? So the approach we will take to this end is to first come up with like a minimum possible model to understand the signal in the ferromagnet. And this is important because this makes sense to do because we know what that microscopically the purple curve is coming from a net magnetization. And once we have this understanding, we'll try to see whether we can use it to understand the zero field curve as well. Okay, so what's the minimal model of a ferromagnet we'll try to come up with? Well, we'll try to do an absolutely absurd approximation, which is to approximate this whole complicated band structure as a two-level model with some initial state and a final state, and we're looking at optical transitions between them. To encode the ferromagnetic nature, we will allow this initial state to be split by some Zeeman energy. And then we are looking at transitions between the initial and final states. And one of these initial states can be excited with the left circularly polarized light and the other one by the right circularly polarized light. And this eventually gives rise to circular dichroism. And the advantage of doing this ridiculously simple model is that we can look at any textbook and see what is the dielectric constant associated with this two-level system. And it's given by the typical Lorentzian shape here with a few free parameters. So that's what we'll try working with. And we choose the parameters to reproduce the reflection circular dichroism that's been experimentally observed. And we actually do a little bit better than that. We also reproduce the optical conductivity and reflectivity, which I'm not showing here in the interest of time. So now, I mean, should we be surprised by this agreement? Maybe a little bit because the approximation is very simple, but on the other hand, we had enough free parameters to make it work. So maybe it's not as surprising. But now we get to the real thing, which is can we use the same model to understand the spectrum at zero field? And so what we are going to do is use the same model for a ferromagnet, but now we are going to apply it to an alternating stack of ferromagnets. So we have spin up, spin down, spin up, spin down. This is our model of an antiferromagnet. And we assume that the optical properties or the dielectric properties of each of these layers are the same as for the bulk ferromagnet, but just the sign of delta omega changes between layers. And now we can employ some sort of mathematical machinery to understand what is the reflection going to look like from this stack. And the machinery we use is actually conceptually very simple. We just need to solve boundary conditions at all of these interfaces, which can be done through the so-called transfer matrix approach. So it's technically not hard to do. Okay, and once we do that, and now we have no more free parameters because we have fixed all of the free parameters to get this purple curve. But now with no more free parameters and just this alternating ferromagnet model, this is what we get for a spectrum of an antiferromagnet. And this is for one domain. Of course, we could have a different domain with a different sign of spin at the top layer, and then we get the opposite sign. And so what this analysis here is telling us is that reflection circular dichroism is indeed sensitive to time reversal symmetry in an antiferromagnet that's symmetric with respect to this product symmetry. So we see this in the model, and the model matches the experiment quite well. So we were quite happy about that, but not fully satisfied, because we still wanted to understand, what sets the size of this antiferromagnetic signal. We can get it in this model, but physically where it's coming from, and also why, what's the intuition for why are these spectra for ferromagnet and antiferromagnet so different? And to address that, we can look actually at the analytical solution for reflection circular dichroism from an antiferromagnet. And we've done this using this transfer matrix approach. And then we realized it was actually done in the literature already by Jeloshinsky in 1995. And so what they found, the calculation we are doing is we are looking at the complex Moch angle for a ferromagnet and an antiferromagnet. And we're looking at the ratio of the one for the ferromagnet and the one for the antiferromagnet. And so what we find is that the ratio of the antiferromagnetic and the ferromagnetic Kerr angle is given by this factor. So there's the I, the complex imaginary unit. There's the K naught, which is the wave vector, and index of refraction, and the layer separation or the lattice constant. And this is really quite telling about the physics of this effect, because this factor appears in the propagation factor here. And so what this is telling you is that we have a Kerr effect in an antiferromagnet because you don't perfectly cancel the effect of the spins up and spin down, because the wave propagates through the material. And so this now gives us a way to address some of the questions we had, such as what sets the size of the antiferromagnetic signal? Well, it's related to the ferromagnetic one, and it's suppressed because there are spins of different orientations, but it's suppressed only by this factor here. We have d over lambda, which is a small number, but there's also 2 pi times n, which is not such a small number. So the suppression factor is not impossibly small. And in general, it is possible to see Moch and reflection circular dichroism from antiferromagnets. And the second question we could ask is, why are the ferromagnetic and antiferromagnetic spectra so different? And the answer is that this I times n factor is complex. So the real and imaginary parts of Moch in ferromagnets and antiferromagnets get mixed up. And so the imaginary part measured here, reflection circular dichroism, the imaginary parts are not simply proportional to each other. Another question we could ask is, why is this, is this surprising? I mean, in hindsight, perhaps not, but it's really usually thought, often these signals are thought to be either symmetry forbidden, or people think about them as being too weak to be noticed, but they're really not what we see here. And one of the things that helped us to see this in this material is the fact that it's a van der Waals material, so we can get very flat, atomically flat top surfaces, even in bulk materials. Okay, and why does this matter? Well, it's because once we know that we can see reflection circular dichroism even in A-type antiferromagnets, we can use them to learn more about the systems. So for example, here we can see that magnetic field can actually tune these antiferromagnetic domains, which is also a bit surprising, and we believe it occurs because of the coupling of the magnetic field to the surface spins, which experience a weaker exchange than the bulk. And we are working on some Monte Carlo simulations to capture this. We can also then use RCD as a tool to image domains in antiferromagnets. So these are 2 images of domains in the sample taken on 2 different cooldowns. The patterns are different, indicating the spontaneous nature of the time reversal symmetry breaking here. Yeah. Okay, and so with this, I'm really coming up to the end. I hope, well, I've shown you a range of different ways in which we can use magneto-optics to detect time reversal symmetry breaking in antiferromagnets. And the two things I've shown you is how to use linear magneto-birefringence, which has the symmetry of the piezomagnetic effect, to detect new symmetries and new phases, and also how we can use reflection circular dichroism and Moog to detect time reversal breaking even in so-called simple antiferromagnets. And thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Veronika, for your nice talk. And please, question, please.
Can you show the first compound in the slide where you
I'm sorry,
compare?
I can't hear you very well. Can I show what?
Maybe please come here.
The last slide for the first compound.
Last slide for the first compound. Okay. I can. This one?
Yes, and can you go slightly earlier where you showed the comparison with Moog method?
Yeah.
Yes, you said that if the time symmetry is broken, then there should be some signal using the Moog method. However, you haven't explained why we don't see it here.
Okay, there are two parts to this answer. So I didn't quite say that. I said if you see Moog, that means time reversal is broken, but time reversal can be broken without Moog. So you can break time reversal but still keep mirror symmetries, which prohibit Moog. So that's one part of the answer. The second part is there is always a question also of mechanisms and such, right? So even if something is allowed by symmetry, it could be too weak to detect. So here actually in this low temperature phase, the symmetry is so low that everything is allowed. But you see here that, I mean, there's just no observable Moog. And there is also there is no out of plane magnetization. And I think, which is often associated with Moog, although not necessary. So although it's allowed, uh, it seems to be very weak. So that's here specifically, it's a mechanism thing, but also in general, time reversal can be broken and Moog can still be prohibited by symmetry.
Okay, thank you.
Does this answer? Yeah.
More questions, please.
Yeah, I have a question. Very nice talk, Veronika.
Thank you.
Could one estimate actually, so there's a length scale probably for this up-down A-type ordering, right? At some point it will
Yeah.
kind of, can you estimate this length scale from your model or from the data?
Yeah, I mean, okay, I think I went a little too fast here, but so okay, this is the relevant thing. So
Right.
this antiferromagnetic signal is suppressed with respect to the ferromagnetic by, the relative things is the lattice constant divided by the wavelength, which of course is a small number, which is why people often think this shouldn't be seen, but it's multiplied by a relatively, decent number on the order of, this can be 30 or something, 2 pi times the index of refraction. So that's, I mean, yeah. Does that
So no,
answer?
what I mean is if I look at the left, you have this up-down
Yeah.
sequence which it goes to infinity, right? But in
Yeah.
principle, that would be a length scale where there's the first flip or the first wrong layer. So do you see what I mean?
No, sorry.
So suppose that the fourth layer would be flipped, and from there on you have.
Uh-huh.
From there on, you continue with the opposite stacking, right? So that could happen. And my question is
Absolutely, yeah.
If you could estimate on what length scale this would happen.
I see. So what you're asking whether we can estimate from our data whether that happens or yeah, I don't know the answer to that. So, what we did I have played a little bit with these models and yeah, you can see the changes. and there's the penetration depth is the relevant thing, right? And so the closer you are to the surface,
Right.
the more sensitive we are, of course. But the problem is, of course, if something happens, I don't know, 15 layers deep, it will change the spectral shape a little bit, but it's kind of hard to, it's not going to be a sign flip anymore. So I don't think at the level of the crudeness of the model here, I don't think we can be that quantitative really to be able to tell. But if we have a more microscopic, very precise model calibrated against the data where we can, then I think this could become quite precise. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Online question.
Online question. Okay, yeah. Please, yeah. There is an online question.
Okay, thank you very much for this nice talk. I have a question concerning to the second part, where these MBT materials, they have a lot of problems with intersite changing between bismuth and manganese, and then you have some antiferromagnetically coupled manganese in there. Could that be relevant for the observation, at least for the field training or for the domains which you see in your experiment?
Yeah, it could be. And I really, this is not something that we studied in detail. I mean, this compound is really actually complicated in many ways. It's been studied a lot, what happens at the surfaces as well. My understanding of the literature is that the current understanding is that this antiferromagnetism persists all the way up to the surface. But yeah, the question, I think we'll have to study quite a bit in detail what causes this field training, and I don't.
But if you look at your magnetization curve, there is no clear saturation at the end, and this already.
Oh, that's because of the. Sorry, that's because of the temperature. There is at low temperatures, but this is at 15 Kelvin, which is the limitation of our optical cryostat. That's why we did this for a comparison. So the curve looks very clean at low temperatures.
Yeah, very clean. But okay, I think we have a lot of studies on that, and you typically you cannot avoid these interstitials, which are strongly coupled to these layers.
I agree.
That this spatial variation of your coupling is present, and it's also spatial variation in a B plane. So I'm pretty sure that your domains and your field training effects have something to do with these interstitials.
I mean, I think that's very possible. In general, domains often have something to do with the effects, and that's absolutely, this is not the focus of the study we did here. It is something we are interested in pursuing later, and yeah, I'm sure it plays a role. I think the main point, here that we were trying to address is if we take the simplest, the kind of Occam's razor approach, if we take the simplest possible interpretation of just the zero field data, can we understand it as coming from the antiferromagnetism? And I think we can. But then what really happens is a function field and so on. I think that's much more detailed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there some question more?